Okay.
Okay, I'll go ahead and admit.
Great. Welcome, everyone. Wait just a second while people enter. Okay. Well, welcome to October's information session titled A Holistic Outlook for Yukon and Kuskokwim River Salmon, Understanding Recent Population Drivers to Assess Future Recovery. This webinar is being hosted by the Alaska Tribal Resilience Learning Network under the Alaska Climate Adaptation Science Center in partnership with the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society. My name is Lori Petrowski. I am one of the climate resilience liaisons with the Alaska CASC and the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society, and I live here in Fairbanks. As with all of our sessions, this session is currently being recorded to post on the website. So to start, some quick Zoom reminders. If you're calling in, please mute your phone. If you don't have a dedicated mute button, I believe pressing *6 should mute your phone. And if you are using your computer audio, all participants have been muted. So during the question and answer session, you'll be able to unmute yourself and ask a question. You can also enter your questions into the chat and we'll read your questions out loud.
Okay.
We invite those of you who are able to access the chat on Zoom to introduce yourself and where you're calling in from today. So we acknowledge that everywhere that we live and work is on Indigenous lands, and our team is located all across the state. One of our main offices is located on the traditional homelands of the Lower Tanana Dene people in interior Alaska. Our offices are physically located on Trothieta, meaning Indian Potato Ridge campus at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Traditional Chief Peter John from Minto shared the story of this ridge in the 1990s, and the official name was changed in 2013. So we have team members also located in Shaktoolik and in Anchorage. And we also often work as a team together. So here's a quick picture of a lot of the folks that we work with to provide support as part of this learning network. And one of the intent of the Alaska Tribal Resilience Learning Network, or the AKTRLN, is to create a community of learning, sharing, technical assistance, training, and support for Alaska tribes and Indigenous communities as they respond to and adapt to current and future impacts of climate change. And there are several ways that you can participate in the Learning Network in addition to participating in these information sessions. So these include signing up for individual community check-ins, signing up for our monthly e-bulletin, and attending any of our trainings. So with that, it is my pleasure to welcome Terese, Janessa, Andrew, and Erik to talk about Yukon and Kuskokwim River salmon.
Thanks so much, Lori. Can you hear me okay? I just want to double check my audio. Okay, awesome. Yeah, well, I'll just kick us off, I suppose. My name is Terese Vicente. I work with the Kuskokwim River Intertribal Fish Commission, and we're really honored to be here and share about our holistic outlook for Yukon and Kuskokwim salmon, understanding recent population drivers to assess future recovery. I'll just have you go to the next slide, Lori. Before we begin, we did just want to recognize the disaster that's been affecting communities in Western Alaska and our regions over the last week and a half. So as many of you are probably aware, the remnants of a typhoon called Typhoon Halong hit the Western Alaska coast, and especially the Kuskokwim Delta, particularly hard last weekend. They've devastated many communities, especially Kipnuk and Kwigillinock. So just wanted to recognize the survivors and the victims of that disaster. The Alaska Community Foundation has set up a relief fund in coordination with many local and regional organizations, and the money is going directly to help the people who have been evacuated from their communities or otherwise working to repair their communities from flood damage. So if you're interested in contributing, you could scan that QR code and you can learn a lot more about recovery efforts at our local public radio station, KYUK, or with the Association of Village Council Presidents. They've been keeping their Facebook page updated, so those links are there as well. You could go to the next slide, Lori, please. We just wanted to do a quick round of introductions, so maybe I'll pass it to Janessa. You could kick us off.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Janessa Newman. I'm Koyukon and Inupiaq from Rampart in Tanana on the Yukon River. I'm incredibly fortunate to be a graduate student at UAF. The DMUMTA program has given me the opportunity to pursue an interdisciplinary master's with a very holistic approach to salmon stewardship. So I'm happy to be here and help present.
Awesome. And my name's Erik Schoen. I'm a research assistant professor and a fish biologist at UAF at the International Arctic Research Center. My parents are John and Mary Beth Schoen, originally from Washington State, now living in Anchorage. I grew up in Juneau, Fairbanks, and Anchorage, and I've been privileged to live in Fairbanks since 2012, again, with my wife and my 2 kids. We really enjoy spending time on the water. We like to raft and fish, and really honored to be able to team up with this awesome team. I'll pass it to Andrew.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Andrew Magel. My parents are Tom and Gretchen Magel, originally from Connecticut, and I am the fish biologist for Kuskokwim River Intertribal Fish Commission. I came to Bethel for the first time as a Jesuit volunteer in 2022. And shortly after that service year concluded, I joined the Fish Commission as a biologist. Very grateful to be there, and I will pass it along to Terese.
Thanks, Andrew. Again, my name's Terese Vicente. I work as the Policy and Programs Director with the Kuskokwim Fish Commission. I live in Mumdeshlukmut, or Bethel, Alaska, the lands of the Yupik and Chupik people here. I'm very privileged to work with the tribes up and down the Kuskokwim, but I grew up south of Seattle in Tacoma, Washington, and spent most of my childhood on Coast Salish lands. My parents come from Michigan and California, and I have 3 younger siblings. Yeah, very happy to be here with this team. You could go to the next slide, please, Lori. I'll pass it back to Janessa.
So I guess I'll start by just admitting for me personally, it's really awkward to talk about the salmon situation. And that's just because this is my everyday reality. What I mean by that is that trying to describe what it means to not be able to fish is like trying to describe to you all what the air is like around us. So I think the best way I can do that is to give you all some background as to why fishing means so much to people on the river, and then get into the current situation. So growing up fishing on the Yukon River was way more than just way more than just feeding ourselves. The process that goes into fishing really provided my family with the template they needed for raising me and my brothers. Running a fish camp is kind of like a big symphony of everything going as exactly as it should. And even the very youngest have a really important role in that. So through fishing, and I learned through my family's example that working together requires everyone to be fluid, adaptable, to have critical thinking skills, and the ability to resolve conflicts. There was still a lot to learn when chaos hit the symphony. For example, in 2017, a nearby wildfire snuck up on my family at our fish camp. And instead of panicking, everyone kicked into high gear, got all the water pumps and chainsaws running. And despite the helicopter overhead telling us to abandon our camp on their intercom, we stayed and were able to save our camp. To this day, our cabin still has those smoldering scars that remind us of the perseverance and the resiliency that it takes to think on your toes and to problem solve even in a state of crisis. Through fishing, our families help us forge the tools for life. Tools for self-control, the ability to think creatively, to keep going through the ups and downs, and that everything in life is actually really figure outable. Fishing teaches us to hold our laughter and joy as equally as we hold our grief. It teaches us to see life with gratitude and abundance. So since before I can remember, I've known that everything that I do, every choice I make, and everything I am is connected to fish. In this way, I truly believe that I and many other people up and down the river were raised by salmon. Today, people in the Yukon have not fished since 2019. In fact, the state signed a Chinook salmon moratorium prohibiting fishing until at least 2030. And salmon on both the Yukon, Kuskokwim, and other western rivers have collapsed to historic lows. This is especially true for Chinook and chum salmon. And as we move into the presentation, I just want to acknowledge that many of the salmon indicators we'll share here have really come to light because of the people on the rivers, the people who have lived and relied on these salmon for generations. So just know that much of what we share is not to claim what many people along the rivers have suspected, but to uplift and acknowledge, to uplift that knowledge and help Western science begin to understand what is really going on with Yukon and Kuskokwim salmon, as well as help us get a better understanding of what might happen next and into the future. Next slide.
Thanks so much, Janessa, for opening us and sharing about your family and how fish raised you. It was really, really beautiful. And as Janessa alluded to, what we want to share with you all today in this work is how a team of us gathered together over the last couple of weeks to examine some of the indicators of salmon health and abundance and try to understand those indicators so we can build a better outlook of how salmon might be in the future and how people and managers might respond to that. But first, just to provide some framing, in addition to what Janessa shared, we wanted to start with just a quick look at the 2025 season on the Yukon and Kuskokwim and some of the status of fish in our rivers. So as many folks might know, chum and Chinook salmon on the Yukon and Kuskokwim have been in a state of decline for at least 15 years on the Kuskokwim and well over 20 years on the Yukon. And in 2025, abundance of both of those species remained well below historic abundance levels. There were limited subsistence fisheries on the Kuskokwim River for Chinook and for chum, and no fisheries on the Yukon, as Janessa spoke to, for now the 7th year in a row for king salmon, and for multiple years for chum salmon. There used to be really vibrant commercial fisheries on both rivers that supported people's livelihoods and helped them participate in traditional ways of hunting and fishing and gathering, and there were no commercial fisheries for either species on either river this year. So this is having really big impacts to communities as well as to the ecosystems of our rivers. Now on the flip side, what we're noticing on the Kuskokwim is that sockeye salmon populations are experiencing near record high abundance. And that, at least on our river, on the Kuskokwim, has helped some families attain better food security and continue their cultural practices. Sockeye salmon are not as prevalent on the Yukon. So when we started to look at some of these species and some of these indicators that we'll get into, we focused on Kuskokwim sockeye salmon. You could click to the next slide, Lori, please. So seeing this status of the salmon this past year on the Yukon and Kuskokwim, our team here started to put our heads together with some of our salmon colleagues and ask why. Really more specifically, we started to ask, what indicators of salmon health and abundance, whether they be climate related or ecological or caused by humans and fisheries, what indicators from recent years of the salmon life cycle could give us an idea about this status and kind of the longer term trends with the declines of Chinook and chum and abundance of Kuskokwim sockeye. This stems from something a similar group of us had investigated a couple years ago, back in 2022 and then in 2023 for the Eastern Bering Sea Ecosystem Status Report. And I'll share more about that report in a moment. But in those past analyses, we only looked at a single species. And we also did what our colleague and co-contributor to this work, Vanessa Von Biela at USGS, called a post-mortem report. We looked at what indicators led up to the most recent season, so in this example, in 2025. However, when this team of us put our heads together again this year, we started thinking through indicators of salmon health and abundance. We decided we wanted to look at multiple species of salmon, not just one, and also think about how we could bridge our understanding of what's contributed to these trends with management into the future, not just kind of this, report that looks back at just the season that just happened. If you click next again, Lori, please. So we then asked, can we use those indicators to understand what might happen in the next year? And our team wants to be really clear that we're not attempting to forecast salmon or add to the current forecasts that the state produces for multiple species. But really, we want to attempt to build a holistic, forward-looking outlook based on what we currently know about what affects salmon. So much of salmon research really just looks backward, or it attempts to project models well into the future, and it doesn't really help fishers or managers think about what's happened recently that might affect the here and now or the next year. So those are some of the questions we were hoping to ask. I don't know if Erik or Janessa or Andrew have anything to add to that explanation.
That was great, Terese.
Awesome. Thanks, Erik. Laura, you could go to the next slide, please. Cool, thanks. So this led our group to reimagine and expand on our past work in a 2025 contribution to the Eastern Bering Sea Ecosystem Status Report. We've called it Synthesizing Indicators of YK, or Yukon Kuskokwim Salmon Health and Abundance. So a little background on the Ecosystem Status Report in case folks don't know what they are. So annually, there's a team of researchers at NOAA Fisheries down in Juneau that produce these really comprehensive documents that bring together environmental, fishery, and climate data for the North Pacific Fishery Management Council. And that's the body that manages federal fisheries offshore the coast of Alaska. Each year, there are 3 ecosystem status report documents. There's one for the Eastern Bering Sea, there's one for the Aleutian Islands, and there's another one for the Gulf of Alaska. Together, these ecosystem status reports try to create a picture of what, ecosystem trends are going on throughout the North Pacific. These documents are supposed to be used by the North Pacific Council when they set their quotas, which they call total allowable catch, or TAC, for the fisheries that they manage, the commercial fisheries in the ocean for the following year. So it's an attempt to bring this ecosystem information forward to the marine fishery managers. However, too often we see that the council ignores this ecosystem information and rather relies on single species stock assessment models that come at the same time in their quota setting process. Nonetheless, though, these documents are really impressive collations of current research throughout the North Pacific. There's contributions from state and federal agencies, from university researchers, as well as from tribes. We do find, though, that most of these documents are really heavy on the Western science contributions and Western scientific research, though I think that the ecosystem status report authors, as well as the council, are interested in trying to bring in more local and traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge about the ecosystem and the fisheries. And that's something that this group tried to do in this synthesis. So our 2025 contribution is a refreshed look at what we did in 2022 for Chinook salmon, understanding indicators there, and then 2023 for chum salmon. We brought ecosystem-wide knowledge and science of salmon together with the hope to create this forward-looking approach that I mentioned, to anticipate what might happen next year. And to do this, we took next year's 2026 cohorts of Chinook, chum, and sockeye as our endpoint and backtracked each species back to the years when its parent spawners were likely returning to the Yukon and Kuskokwim. So that'd be roughly just looking at age data, 2020 and 2021 for Chinook salmon, and then 2021 and 2022 for chum and sockeye salmon. We'll get into that a little bit more. So then we worked through the salmon life cycle from parent spawners to eggs, freshwater rearing, ocean entry, and then the marine rearing stage that, next year's cohorts or the spawners are still in. And we looked at the indicators that likely affected salmon health and abundance at each of those life stages. We did that according to the published literature, Western scientific methodology, as well as local and indigenous knowledge from the rivers. So we're hoping that this forward-looking approach as part of the ecosystem status report might help the council as well as different fishing industries anticipate abundance and health of Yukon Kuskokwim salmon in the next year. Salmon are a bycatch species in the Bering Sea for the fisheries there. So we hope this information about their trends might help them better reduce and avoid salmon bycatch. But we also think this sort of outlook could be useful for in-river managers and especially fishers, helping us all kind of get a feel of what might come next year from what we currently know. There's an interdisciplinary team that worked on this. Our three organizations represented here, as well as Tanana Chiefs Conference, another a regional consortia in interior Alaska. Other federal agencies, USGS helped with this. And then we even had some non-governmental organizations, Ocean Conservancy worked with us on this. And again, because the ecosystem status report documents tend to be so heavy in Western science, we're really working to uplift local and indigenous knowledge to kind of make this integrated ecosystem perspective, weaving together multiple ways of knowing. So one example is relying on indicators from local and indigenous knowledge that we'll share about in a moment. Another example is we work to create this holistic visual, and we're going to unpack it step by step. It looks really busy on this screen, but I feel like this is kind of our our crowning contribution to the ecosystem status report. And we think something like this really comprehensive visual, this illustrative way of understanding this story, it was more accessible than scatter plots or graphs that often appear in more Western scientific documents. So these are just some of the ways we tried to interweave local and indigenous knowledge into this work. You could go to the next slide, please, Lori. So to start, after considering our indicators, our team developed this outlook for Yukon Kuskokwim salmon in the next year. And based on what we saw in the published literature from local and traditional knowledge from our rivers, we put together this assessment for Chinook, chum, and sockeye. For Chinook, we're anticipating in 2026 there will be a below average abundance of marine juveniles and adult spawners, but those marine juveniles and adult spawners that return to our rivers next year might be in better condition, bigger size, less disease, things like that. It's a similar story for chum salmon, below average abundance, similar to recent years, but perhaps improved condition. For sockeye, we think there is likely to be an above average marine juvenile and adult spawner abundance, particularly of lake type spawning populations. This outlook is something we built after looking through the indicators, and we also color coded it here too in an attempt to make things a little bit more accessible. So you can see green, like in the sockeye situation, means that there have been favorable conditions for salmon. Yellow, there's moderate or even unclear impacts for salmon. And then red is something that's a concerning trend or a concerning indicator. Just keep those in mind as we go forward. And Lori, if you go to the next slide. This is probably what folks are wondering is how did we get here? So now we're going to unpack our approach to building this sort of outlook. You could go to the next slide and I'll pass it on to Erik.
All right, thanks, Terese. So in coming up with this outlook, we considered about 20 different indicators that have been shown to be associated with ups and downs in salmon abundance. So what is an indicator? It's something that can be observed, basically, that is connected, it's associated, it's correlated with either better than expected salmon returns or worse than expected salmon returns. So some of these have to do with climate, like Terese mentioned. So for example, sea surface temperature. We know during recent marine heat waves in the Bering Sea, we've seen downturns in Chinook and chum abundance. So the recent chum salmon crash that happened about 5 years ago, that was associated with an extreme marine heat wave in the Bering Sea. There are things that happen in freshwater. So floods, either like late summer, fall floods that could scour the gravel in the spawning beds and kill the eggs, or also springtime flooding associated with late breakup can be associated with reduced survival for salmon smolts. And then there's a bunch of ecological indicators. These include things like how many juvenile salmon are in the Bering Sea. This is measured on research cruises. The body size of the parent spawners. And then other things like disease, ichthyophonus disease, competition with wild and hatchery fish in the ocean, wildfire, and then also the abundance of predators in freshwater. And then there's some fishery drivers like the number of parent spawners that returned. That's kind of the most basic one. And then bycatch in the Bering Sea in the trawl fisheries, and intercept in the Area M, the state managed marine fisheries that where many of our Western Alaska salmon are caught on the tip of the Alaska Peninsula there. So we looked at a bigger suite of drivers than the ones shown here. A lot of them, they were basically neutral. It was like, okay, we know this can be important, but nothing really particularly good or bad happened in the years we were looking at. So we don't highlight those in the report or in the graphic. And we really tried to focus on the ones where it was either concerning or favorable, or there was, we had something to say, essentially. So we looked at more drivers than this, but these are the ones we focused on. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we'll go ahead and just start stepping through these different life stages. So for the parent spawners, like Terese said, these are for Chinook. So Chinook can return at a bunch of different ages. We focused on the two most common age classes. So those are fish so the fish that are going to return next summer in 2026, their parents spawned mostly in 2020 and 2021. Also, some adjacent years will contribute a little bit to those returns, but these are the big two. So we know those were really bad years for Chinook in both rivers. So that just based on that, there weren't many parent spawners. That means there weren't many eggs that were laid in the gravel. So our baseline assumption is we're probably going to have low returns again. But what else happened after those eggs were laid? So we know there was, in recent years, there's been more ichthyophonus documented, especially in the Yukon. We know body size of king salmon has been declining. Those 2 years in particular, I haven't seen a comprehensive look at Chinook body size from these particular years, but they were on trend. Basically, salmon are getting smaller. They're coming back younger and smaller, and this was pretty much continuing that trend. So these are all concerning indicators. For chum, we're looking at 2021 and 2022 for the parent spawners. Those are low returns. 2021 was the all-time low. This was like shockingly low. And then 2022 was just a little bit better. And then sockeye, we had above average returns in 2021 and 2022. And for the next couple slides, you'll see we've added a bunch of citations to the bottom of the slide. So some of these, LK stands for local knowledge, IK is indigenous knowledge. And then where we have a name and a date, those are either papers or reports. These are just a few of the references we cite in our paper. We just thought some of you might be interested. Where do we get this information? And some of these references are specific to what happened in these years. So like what happened in 2020 and 2021. Others are specific to why are these things indicators? Like why is ichthyophonus related to Chinook productivity? Why is body size important? So we have them, they're kind of a mix here on the bottom of the slide because we didn't want to load up our slides with citations, but the document is going to lay out, I guess, what the evidence is for each of these indicators. So let's go to the next one.
Thanks, Erik.
Yeah, Terese, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I can. So the next stage is the egg incubation period over the winter after the parent spawners come up. So again, same approach here. You can see for each species, the approximate years, or I guess the years that we're looking at when this life stage occurred. And some of the indicators we found really stand out for these periods. For Chinook and chum, it was extreme fall, flood, and washout events, especially on the Yukon. In the fall of 2021, there were really high late summer and fall flood events, record rainfall. There was complete washout of the Henshaw Creek Weir, washouts on the Kaltag and Nulata rivers in the Yukon. And there's, these sorts of washouts and flood events have been associated with reduced productivity, particularly of Chinook salmon on the Yukon River, but they also affect chum. So you can see too, we've color coded, again, that kind of traffic light, the red, yellow, green approach. You can see these fall flood event indicators are coded as red. They were not favorable for salmon. Something that also likely affected Chinook salmon during this time were unprecedented summer wildfires that happened in 2022 throughout the region. There were really immense fires on the East Fork Andreevsky, on the Yukon, also up the Gweethluk River. And so there's been some concern by local and traditional knowledge holders that some of the firefighting initiatives to reduce or stall these fires may have raised water temperatures. They may have eroded stream banks. The release of retardant chemicals may have gotten into waterways, and all of these could, be affecting eggs and the conditions in which the eggs incubated the following winter. There's also been instances recorded of invasive species being introduced into new regions because of the lake water pulled up by the plains to spread on wildfires. So there's a lot of local and indigenous knowledge about how wildfires may have affected Chinook in these years. Then for sockeye, this is where we've started to realize that we don't have a lot of data specific to Kuskokwim sockeye and the trends that we're seeing here. So much of the sockeye research is on Bristol Bay, which makes a lot of sense because there's, massive, the world's largest wild sockeye salmon runs. But in looking through some of this information, we didn't find a lot about specific, their population specific to the Kuskokwim. So we assume that those fall flood events in 2021 likely affected sockeye eggs, but we coded this as yellow because it, while it likely did, we're uncertain. So that's something we need to look into more in the future. Could go to the next slide, please, Lori.
Okay, so stepping forward, the eggs hatch, the fry emerge out of the gravel. And then for Chinook, Alaska Chinook, almost all Alaska Chinook populations generally spend 1 year rearing in freshwater. So that's the little fish with the little stripes, the parr marks on the bottom there. Chum salmon, on the other hand, they come out of the gravel and they button up their yolk sac and they swim straight out to sea. And sockeye, typically in most places, they rear for at least 1 year in lakes or sometimes multiple years. In the Cusco, a lot of sockeye actually rear in off-channel habitats within rivers. So we have both. There's lake rearing and river type stream rearing sockeye. So the highlighted indicators here, again, there was that there in 2021, there were those big floods on tribs of the Yukon and the Cusco. So for the fry that were the juvenile Chinook fry that were in those rivers, that could have been harmful. Also, local and traditional knowledge indicates that northern pike abundance has been increasing. And there's a lot of concern that pike predation is having increasing impacts on juvenile salmon, both Chinook and chum. This is an area where Western science, I think there's a lot of opportunity to study this and see what we can learn about this from a Western science perspective to complement this traditional knowledge. And here, this was exciting to be able to highlight this and include this in our outlook, because this is something that traditional knowledge holders have been talking about for a long time. And there's really, really strong knowledge of this process happening. Again, we understand less about what is driving the sockeye populations in the Cusco. Let's go to the next one. And back to Terese.
Thanks, Erik. Thanks, Lori. So now as fish are entering the ocean, you can see first that the life cycle years start to align here just based on how these fish progress. So we're looking at what happened in 2022 and 2023 as those juvenile salmon swam out to the Bering Sea. And you'll notice Chinook and chum have very similar patterns here. Both the freshwater in that first winter at sea, first year at sea for Chinook and chum, researchers notice that there is an improved juvenile condition, or which is measured as energy density, basically calories. A lot of it is associated with food web. How are the fish, how full are their stomachs? So that had been improved from recent years, and that may have been driven by, or it's associated with, a more average sea surface temperature in the eastern Bering Sea, following some pretty extreme marine heat waves we've seen over the last 10 or 15 years. However, while those are in the green, what was in the red is the actual abundance of those juvenile salmon. Both Chinook and chum were at they're well below average in 2022 and 2023 both. So that's concerning, and that helped form our outlook for the next year. And then for sockeye, again, we're not really sure about Kuskokwim sockeye and what's driving those. So we have this question of, what might be affecting Kuskokwim sockeye at this life stage. Could go to the next slide, please.
Okay, and then later in the marine rearing stage, so these fish are getting bigger in the ocean. For all three species, we listed basically competition in the ocean as a negative indicator. And the reason for this is that 2023 is estimated to have the highest on record total abundance of salmon in the Pacific Ocean. And this is pretty concerning. There's been evidence for many years that in years with lots of pink salmon in the ocean. A lot of other species don't grow as big, and they have worse population productivity. So you get fewer offspring coming back than you would expect. So when you add up, or this is work that's been done by the North Pacific Anadromous Fish Commission. Greg Ruggiero has been a leader in this work. But when you add up all the wild fish and all the hatchery fish of all species in the Pacific, 2023 had the most salmon in the ocean, the most mouths to feed. So all of our wild fish from Western Alaska are going out into this crowded ocean, and there's not enough food to go around is the concern. So we listed that as negative for all three. And then intercept fisheries and Bering Sea bycatch, we listed both of those as, I guess, neutral or moderate. And I think Terese can speak a little bit more clearly to those, but these were basically the bycatch and the intercept harvest in those fisheries were they were reduced relative to previous years. It's still concerning. This is still fish getting killed in the ocean. And certainly we think those numbers should go lower. But I guess the numbers that are reported are not abnormally high. So we listed these as neutral. Would you like to add anything on those indicators, Terese?
No, I think you explained it really well, but happy to take questions if people have some after. So you go to the next.
Okay. Yeah, and let's go to the next one. Okay, so putting this all together into one big circular figure, this is what we came up with. We had some amazing help by a graphic designer, Patty Chambers at the Ocean Conservancy, who actually took our text and made this graphic. To me, I don't have the skills to do this, but really this is our attempt. We spent some time with this and tried to make it clear, but we'd love to hear from you. Here we've taken these different life stages, we've put them into circles representing the circular life cycle. Chinook are on the outside, chum in the middle ring, and then sockeye on the inside. And then we have the red, yellow, and green icons throughout the life cycle. Really, this is kind of a first attempt for us to, like Terese said, CritFic has led similar work for Chinook and chum in the past. This is my first time being involved with this. It was a big task. It's kind of ambitious. And I'm sure there's a lot of ways we could do this better or make it more clear. Maybe there's research we missed or traditional knowledge we should have included. So anyway, I guess pulling it all together, this is how we got to those outlooks that for Chinook and chum, we're probably going to see below average returns in 2026. Sockeye are likely to see above average returns. And here are the reasons why. So let's go to the next one.
Yeah, thanks, Erik, for tying that together. And we're already thinking of next steps to expand this work. And like Erik said, we really want to hear from people about your ideas. And I see some comments in our chat and questions too that I'm noting down because I think they'll help us here. Some ideas that we've already had as a team are, how can we build more space in for local and Indigenous knowledge? Is there a way we could develop a workshop or some sort of program, some sort of LKIK tracking app, database, something like that to make sure that that information is always included in this sort of work? As we noted, there's a lot of gaps in understanding drivers of Kuskokwim sockeye trends. So we'd like to see more research on that to be able to understand what's going on this river. We also really want to implement these understandings into salmon management, both in the marine environment through the council, through NOAA fisheries, as well as in river by the different state and federal and tribal managers on the Yukon and Kuskokwim. And something we've also been really trying to figure out is how we could build a real-time repository of standout events or indicators as they happen, documenting that local and indigenous knowledge so that it can be included moving forward. I saw in the chat a reference to the Siku app, and I think that's exactly something that we're starting to think about how we could develop something like that. So you go to the next slide, please, Lori. And I'll pass it over to Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Terese and Erik, for that presentation about the drivers. And related to that, some of the things that the research that goes into providing this data on the Kuskokwim in terms of understanding these drivers. A big component of it is salmon monitoring, which is traditionally accomplished through weirs. This is Takatna River Weir, which is run by the Fish Commission and Takatna Tribal Council in the headwaters of the Kuskokwim. It's the only long-term data set on Chinook and chum salmon spawner returns to the headwaters, being run from 2000 to 2013 under Department of Fish and Game in 2017 through the present. And this is really trying to get an estimate of how many are returning and feeding into the escapement model that Fish and Game puts at the end of the season in terms of total run size. You can go on to the next one. Another thing that we're looking at, given the current environment with a lot of weirs being flooded out in the course of the season or uncertain funding, and with the presence of a lot of unmonitored tributaries to assess spawner returns, is checking out these alternative methods of assessing spawner returns. This started in 2024. The Fish Commission was working with a postdoctorate from Washington State University, Dr. Daniel Auerbach, to see if we can get an escapement assessment from drones. We did a rafting drone survey on the Guithuc River, which we collected 60,000 plus images over 60 miles of the Guithuc River. And while that was productive and we have been able to count fish, we realized some of the limitations of that approach in terms of it being non-continuous, sort of just over a period of time, which was 10 days of rafting. Doesn't provide an estimate for the whole season, as well as issues that can arise from high water levels and turbidity. So this summer we did transition into stationary camera-based monitoring system. So on the right-hand screen, that's what the camera system looks like. It was deployed on the Salmon Aniak River in conjunction with that weir to see if the camera is counting similar amounts of fish as the weir records. And so far, results have been positive, and we're hoping to expand this to several other tributaries in this upcoming summer. We can go to the next slide. And then one other means of monitoring the salmon runs of adult returns is through our community-based harvest monitoring program. This employs local fishers from 8 different lower Kuskokwim villages to collect harvest data from local fishers in those communities. This is in conjunction with data collected in the Bethel area by ONC, as well as flight counts of boats and nets conducted by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. All of that data is combined into this estimate of fishing effort, total number of fish harvested, and what the run size is looking like. And that is given to, for the past decade, the subsistence fishery management on the Kuskokwim River has been under U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as Kuskokwim River Intertribal Fish Commission. So that data is consolidated and presented to the federal and tribal managers within 24 hours, typically, of a subsistence fishing opener. And that really provides an estimate for an idea of how the run is going and whether another opener can be provided. You can go to the next slide. trying to run through these quickly, but we also, in conjunction with Fish and Wildlife Service and Organized Village of Guifluc, run a small outmigration project on the Guifluc River. This is enumerating juvenile salmon, particularly Chinook salmon, and really getting to understand a lot of the drivers that Terese and Erik were discussing earlier, particularly affecting juveniles in river. Chinook salmon condition and abundance is recorded, as well as that's being gathered through weight and length data, and also monitoring environmental drivers such as temperatures and water levels. And typically a weir is operated on the Guifluc River as well. And this is trying to get at, can we use the numbers of juvenile salmon that we count from here to predict a link to adult returns 5 or 6 years later? And we can go to the next slide. And just understanding, again, some of more these ecological and climate drivers, we've launched an effort to put more water temperature monitors throughout the Kuskokwim watershed. We're doing this on several tributaries that have historically had monitoring efforts, as well as some previously unmonitored to the best of our knowledge, such as the Kizaralik River. And we're also attempting to deploy temperature loggers on the main stem Kuskokwim River, which has proven a bit of a challenge given tidal influence and keeping those loggers stationary in place. But we have been working on methods to improve that. And we can go to the next slide and pass it along to Erik.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Really inspired. The Kuskokwim River and Tribal Fish Commission is doing amazing work. It's super inspiring. We love partnering with you all. I'm in interest of time. We're almost the end of the hour, so I'm just going to gloss through these really quick. These are some examples of fisheries research that we do here at the University of Alaska Fairbanks International Arctic Research Center for and with tribes. So one example is trying to strengthen salmon monitoring networks with new technologies like environmental DNA. This was inspired by a colleague at the Tanana Chiefs Conference in 2021 when that weir got blown out by a flood. They asked us, hey, can you use this environmental DNA tool as another way to count salmon that could be robust to floods? Next slide, please. So we're working with Tanana Chiefs, the Cusco Intertribal Fish Commission, and 2 agencies on 2 related projects. These are led by Maggie Harings, Brandy Kammermans, and Kristen Reese, where weir and counting tower crews filter river water. And next slide, we extract DNA in the lab and quantify salmon DNA concentrations. So we're trying to understand if this could be used as another way to count salmon. Next, please. We're also working on a project funded by the Alaska Climate Adaptation Science Center in partnership with the Yukon River Drainage Fisheries Association and many other partners, where we're trying to tie together changes in climate, habitat quality influenced by human infrastructure like culverts and mines and other impacts on our environment, and also predators like pike. So we're trying to understand how we can take all this information and put it together to prioritize the best, most impactful habitat restoration and salmon stewardship actions to benefit salmon. Next slide. And we have, this is now a master's student, Kristen Reese, is working with us on this. Also, Raven Dawson is another master's student. And this is just a quick underwater photo. I can tell you more about it sometime when we have more time. Next slide. And then finally, if you just advance one more time, we really love to do outreach. I think working with youth is really inspiring for us, and maybe we're able to get some local folks who grow up on the river who have a tremendous knowledge and background and skill in working in salmon ecosystems to pursue careers in fisheries. So we really had a lot of fun out on the Kuskokwim River last summer doing outreach. And that's it for me. So yeah, advance one more. We really appreciate all the co-authors of this report. We appreciate all of you for attending, and thanks especially to the Tribal Resilience Learning Network for the opportunity to present to you all. And we'd love to hear any questions. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you all so much for sharing. And I think we just have a couple minutes for questions, but if anybody wants to unmute themselves, they're welcome to. I heard that there were several questions in the chat. If somebody would like to read some of those out, maybe that's a good use of time.
This is Bruce Wright. I'm the chief scientist at Knik Tribe. For 19 years now, we've been monitoring throughout Alaska paralytic shellfish poisoning. If you're not familiar with that, it's a series of 55 neurotoxins that affect the predators of the algae that produces the toxin. And the neurotoxins can also kill people. The parts that you'd be interested in is for about the last 10 years, we've been also monitoring salmon all along the Gulf of Alaska and parts of the Bering Sea, including the Yukon River. And we're finding levels that exceed the FDA limit for safe consumption in all 5 species of salmon. And in the Yukon River, king salmon and chum salmon have the highest levels. So high that I would recommend people be wary of eating, because some people like to eat the livers of king salmon, that they be wary of eating king salmon livers. So far, the only time that the meat tissue or the gonads have exceeded the FDA limit is chum salmon that were sampled in Amonic on the Yukon River. All of our data that we produce for the last few years, I mean, it's a lot of data. We do like 1,500 PSP sample analysis a year. The Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation Environmental Health Lab does all of our analyses. So we have a lot of data, and it's on our website. It's at the Knik Tribe, and you go to the environmental group, and it's the PSP project, or the Harmful Algal Bloom Project. All the data is there. We have some recent publications that we've produced. So I think that might be a factor. The levels that we're seeing in salmon are high enough to kill salmon and certainly affect them.
Thanks, Bruce. Really appreciate that info. You've shared some of this with me in the past. I'd love to hear the latest from you. So yeah, please share. Love to keep up with the latest.
Fish and Game is providing most of the samples from the Yukon River, and every year they double down on how many fish they want analyzed. So we're getting some better data because we're looking at more fish. It looks like we're getting higher levels of PSP. I think it's just an artifact of the number of samples we're analyzing now. But go to our website and check out the database. It's all there.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce.
You bet.
We're almost at the top of the hour. If you need to go, thank you so much for attending. I'm happy to stick around for a few more minutes if anybody wants to stay on and ask any more follow-up questions. Otherwise, our emails are up there. We'd love to hear from you.
This is Melinda. Hey, Erik, there was a question there, or a request if there was a way to cite the graphic or share some of this information. Do you have that available for folks?
I'll punt that one to Terese. My understanding, it's in review right now, but there's a government shutdown, so this should come out in the ecosystem status report this fall, right, Terese? Does that come out in like December?
Yep, that's correct. So things might be stalling a little bit or rather the reports may be a little bit more limited because of the government shutdown affecting NOAA staffers' ability to compile them. So stay tuned. But one way or another, we really want to get this work out there. So even if it doesn't make it in this year's ecosystem status report, I'm sure our Fish Commission will find a way to publish it on our website, make it available for others. We're looking at, looking into peer-reviewed journals as well, and then future years of the ecosystem status report too. So I guess stay connected with us.
And we'll also have the slides and information up posted on our EKTRLN website. But thank you all.
Thank you, Melinda. Good point.
So as we're wrapping up here, I just wanted to thank all of the presenters for sharing and flash our contact information for anyone who would like to reach out about future sessions. And these slides will be available on our website. And thank you all and have a great rest of your day.